Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite techniques that will generate big fish and it will generate strikes when other techniques are not working. And that's because it's one of the best ones at generating reaction strikes from the fish, which means even when they're not active, if you can get your bait in front of them, they will bite it out of reactionary instinct. And that's why I love this technique so much. I've done a video in the past and I'll link it up at the end of this video so you can go back and watch the actual presentation of it. And in that video, I used a jig, but there's other baits that you can use for it. So before I get into this technique, I want to remind you guys that I'm doing one-on-one virtual lessons where we can have direct interaction with each other. So if you have questions that you want to ask me specifically about techniques or your favorite lakes, you can reach out to me through those virtual lessons. The link is in my video description. It's a great way to do it. Plus, if you want to support the channel in another manner, please use my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. I'll also link that up here in the video description. It's a great way to support the channel and it's very, very much appreciated. And guys, if you're looking for some tackle to use for this technique, which I call the stroking technique, check out the Tackle Warehouse link. It's a great way to do it. So let's get into it. As I mentioned, I've talked about using a jig before, and most people would suggest that a jig is one of the best baits to use anytime you're stroking a jig, as they call it. You know, this is a technique that was started down on some of the TVA lakes like Kentucky Lake to generate strikes from those fish that people knew were on the ledges, but they couldn't get to bite on traditional baits like a football jig or a shaky head. And actually, I think the stroking the jig came about because guys were dragging football jigs and they started stroking them hard to get them up off the bottom to get some of those lethargic fish and those suspended fish to bite their jig. Well, what that's evolved into is more specialized jigs like this Dirty Jigs Luke Clausen casting jig. So this bait is meant to be fished on the cast. It's got a little bit lighter wire hook on it. It's got a nice O'Shaughnessy style bend to it. And it's just got a good fall through the water versus a big football head jig. I like to pair it up with a small 3-inch Berkeley Pit Boss. It's one of my favorite trailers for throwing a jig. And like I said, I'll put a video up at the end if you want to see the actual method of stroking the jig. But because I did that video, I've had a lot of viewers out there want to know what other baits they can use for a stroking technique. And in this case, like I said, a jig is a great one, but it's not the only one. Generally speaking, what you're looking for is a bait that will create some sort of gliding motion on the fall. A jig with this pit boss on there doesn't necessarily fall straight vertical. It will actually glide a little bit, and that's one of the things I like about it. And like I said, that's what I'm shooting for. And because of that, I would say the second most common bait when you hear people using a stroking technique is to fish it on a tube. So this is the Berkeley Max Scent tube. It's a great tube, but there's a couple of things that I want to point out with this. You might be able to see how the head is a little bit bulbous on this case. Well, that's because of the hook that I'm using. A straight typical tube jig hook will work fine for the stroking technique, but it's not the best in my opinion. You're better off using something that's got, generally speaking, they call it their Goby style. In this case, this is the Poor Boy Baits Goby profile tube hook. And you can see it's got like wings on it. In this case, they do that specifically to create a little bit more of a wider head, because gobies, which are the #1 smallmouth food on the Great Lakes, have a wider head. So they actually do that to flare out the tube. But what that does, if you're stroking the tube, is that will create a much more erratic fall. It's kind of similar to like the flying lure head in that it flares out. So if you're familiar with the old as seen on TV flying lure, that's one of the techniques to it that works so great. It's got a wider spread to it, and therefore it creates that gliding motion. So if you're using a tube, you might want to think about throwing something like that Goby style Poor Boy head, just because it creates a wider profile, which allows that tube to glide better. Other than a tube, you don't hear too many people talking about different baits that they use with a stroking technique. In this case, another one that's gotten really good for me lately is just your typical Ned. I mean, this is just the Maxent Little General by Berkeley, paired up with a Z-Man TRD finesse hook on there. Again, the nice thing about this bait is it gets really good gliding motion. It falls very similar to a tube. You get some of that spiraling motion, some of that side to side. It just has an erratic fall. And that's one of the keys with this whole technique is you want to get it up off the bottom, and then it's got, say, 4 or 5 feet to fall back to the bottom, and you want it to move irregular to create those reactionary strikes. And a Ned head bait and a small a turd style bait is a great way to do it. I generally like to use, in this case, a bait that doesn't float, like the finesse TRD is a floating bait, and therefore you get a little bit slower fall. I generally like to go more with the Little General when I'm stroking it because I actually want a faster fall. I don't necessarily want to get my bait up off the bottom and then have it slowly fall back to the bottom. I want to get it up high off the bottom and then have a nice quick darting motion back to the bottom. I think that generates more reactionary strikes. The last bait is one that a lot of people probably wouldn't think about, but it's one of my absolute favorites to use for this technique. And that's a lipless crankbait like this War Pig. Just a really good way to get a bait out there that sinks relatively fast to the bottom. And then as soon as you rip it high off the bottom, you get insane motion out of it where it just, rattles up to the surface. And then when you let it fall, I mean, this thing just kind of does whatever it wants. Again, it's got that flat profile that just allows it to dart and glide. Again, very similar to that tube style fall. But that's what you're looking for anytime you're using a stroking technique. Not all baits work great for it. If you can get your beaver style baits will work good. Anything that doesn't have a lot of tail kicking motion generally is going to be better. If you tried to stroke, say, a cross style bait, those flapper legs will actually suspend the bait up in the surface as it falls. You get it 4 or 5 feet off the bottom, the legs kick in, and it falls straight vertical at that point with a much more controlled fall because those flapper legs are actually slowing the fall. It's creating that kind of that helicopter fall, and you don't get that same darting motion. So you want to choose your baits wisely anytime you're trying to implement a stroking technique with that bait, because it really is a very good way at generating those strikes on days that the fish are just not active. When that happens, you need to get their natural instinct flowing when you bring a bait by them. And if you just have a standard bait just moving by nice and slow, it's not going to trigger them necessarily to bite. If you get something that creates some quick darting motion that goes by them, they bite it out of instinct. So guys, remember that. It'll help you catch a few more fish when the fishing is tough. And the stroking technique's a great way to do it. Like I said, I'll put the video showing the actual technique up in the link here so you guys can watch that if you'd like. Otherwise, give it a try. If you're not using it, it works across the country for all species of bass and is a great way to catch numbers and giants. So give it a try. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We'll have a new one coming out tomorrow.